Mr. Sanjeev Goenka, Mr. Shiv Kumar, Mrs. Preeta Reddy, Mrs. Rekha Sethi, Mr. Rajendra Kashyap, uh, distinguished winners of the awards, and distinguished participants. I'm delighted to be here again amongst AIMA for the 40th National Management Convention, and would like to congratulate AIMA on its Ruby Jubilee NMC. The Ruby Jubilee seems to be a nice word. It's always been a pleasure to come to AIMA's conventions. I've seen AIMA grow from strength to strength, and I've attended many of their conventions. And it has evolved into a think tank and a hub of management, development, and education. It's not easy for a purely voluntary, non-lobbying organization to succeed, but AIMA has won the respect and support of the management fraternity, academia, and government through its efforts to build India's management capacity. Once again, through this convention, AIMA is trying to explore the possible management responses to the prevailing uncertainty, and this is indeed commendable. I'd like to compliment Mr. Chanda Kochar and Mr. Asim Premji, who have become legends in the lifetime of stupendous achievements. You not only lead corporate institutions, but have made seminal contributions to Brand India. Your work is an inspiration to the new generation of Indian entrepreneurs and executives. Mr. Gopalakrishnan, you are a visionary of the Tata Group and a wonderful writer. I would like to congratulate the eminent award winners also. Even as we celebrate achievements, we are only too aware of the global economic scenario that envelopes us. I was listening to Mr. Shiv Kumar, who was talking of lifespans. What he missed out was talking of lifespans of governments and politicians. So that also is undergoing a change, and politicians are finding it very difficult to get re-elected. Similarly, governments are being, people are expecting much more of governments, and we are seeing a very great change taking place in the Indian political landscape, which is important. We've seen every decade see this change. And India is a complex country. It's not only the largest democracy, it is also the rowdiest democracy. And in the complexities of governance of India, of course there will be challenges. A complex society, complexities of diversity, complexities of vision, and the proliferation of so many political parties. I don't think any country has more political parties than what India has. India has perhaps the largest number of political parties on this planet. It has more political parties than I think the whole of Asia put together. So that change also, Mr. Shiv Kumar, is a change you could perhaps do some research on and see how that's going to impact the uncertainties of the future. Ever since the financial crisis hit economies across the globe in 2008, the world has been facing an uncertain economic environment. What originated as the bursting of the real estate bubble led to the exposing of fantasy finance in Europe and in the United States. I deliberately use this word fantasy finance, but bankers should really adopt this phrase. That's exactly what happened. Well, we live in a globalized world, and as India's engagement with the global economy has grown, whatever happens does impact India and emerging markets in particular. Slowdown in demand, volatile capital inflows. By one account, in the decade before 2008, 70% of the capital from Europe was exported. 70%. It went to the United States, it went to North America, South America, Asia, Africa, wherever. But 70% of capital used to be exported. Now that has been a big change since 2008 because that got compressed. There was not so much of availability. That again had a big impact. And one does not know one still does not know with certainty what the next decade holds. With Europe still needing structural adjustments and structural reforms. That is one of the challenges and one of the things which I think the most uncertain thing is the future of Europe. How will they be able to make these structural changes? It's just not balancing, it's not dealing with deficits. But those deficits can only be addressed by structural changes. And it is those structural changes which is going to be the challenge of the future. Well, in India, our growth rate came down to 5% due to a combination of these factors, global factors, and obviously domestic constraints. The Indian economy did grow at an average of 8% over the last decade, including 5% last year. The economic fundamentals, that's the important thing to know. The economic fundamentals still remain strong. And when we look at the screen, we see many figures, but one figure I always like talking about is the growing disposable incomes. The growing disposable incomes in rural India. A 5 lakh rupee income in Delhi, annual income in Delhi means nothing. But a 5 lakh rupee income in my district means one SUV. So these figures, there are many figures which are not on screens. And one of them is the growing disposable incomes, especially in rural India. That is going to be, that's another very big change which has taken place. And as we look into the future, we see greater disposable incomes in the future. And that is, I think, one of the most important things. The recent depreciation of the Indian rupee has caused a lot of anxiety among foreign investors. And this is an example of how changes in the macroeconomic environment have affected us adversely. The US Federal Reserve indicated plans to reduce the liquidity injections over the next year or so. And the rupee went down along with other emerging markets. It plunged sharply. More recently, the US Fed failed to implement these actions as early as expected, leading to a huge reversal in capital flows and a recovery in the value of the rupee. Now, the volatility in capital flows is being reflected in similar swings in business sentiment. Well, in India, our twin deficits, the current account and fiscal deficit, have been a cause for concern. We are containing it. We are targeting that we will be 3% in the year 2016-17. But again, balancing it between social expenditure becomes a big challenge. We must not forget that we are still close to 300 million people, less than $1 a day. And the glitter of many things sometimes overpowers this 300 million, $1 a day. And Reserve Bank is taking steps. All of you know that. I won't get into that. The international oil price, again, is a very big uncertainty. What happens in the global arena may impact and does impact global oil prices. And we have tried to address that by increasing prices. Not a very good thing politically, because it's not popular when you raise prices. But that is, again, one of the challenges of government. FDI reform, we have taken steps, and we will continue to take steps. We must remember, India's success of reforms started off in 1991, was India had calibrated reforms. We had no model to follow. We're not following the North American or the Central American models. We're not following the Southeast Asian models or the Asian models. We are following an India model. And the India model has been calibrated reforms. And it is calibrated reforms which has led to this. So we'll continue with our reforms, and we have done a lot, and India remains one of the most open countries. Today, if you ask, if you look at some of the European countries in terms of investment regulations, you'll see India is far more liberal and far more open. We want this because we are looking at FDI inflows, and the good news is that during April to July, India received 7.1 billion in FDI, which is 20% higher than the previous year. And we are making efforts to see that procedures are more transparent and bring clarity to the tax regime. Now, one thing which we must understand that the last decade has been a learning curve for the government. As much as it has been a learning curve for industry, for banks, this enormous change we started in the last decade. Who would have thought 10 years ago we would be talking of this growth, or we would be talking of the PPPs in the scale in which they've been? Even in government, it's a learning curve. And it's sometimes because of this that there has been slip-ups. Now, what is the best PPP? What is the best PPP model? What is the best power purchase agreement? Who could tell us that? And which is the best PPP model? Everyone is there to criticize a PPP. And this learning curve for everybody, it was for industry, it was for the business community, it was for the banks, it was for government. How do we deal with this? And the good part is, I think everybody is seized of it now. Everybody sees that this is where the flaw lies. And this is what we need to make sure that we are able to address it correctly and transparently. The Cabinet Committee on Investments was formed, and the Cabinet Committee on Investments is looking at delayed projects. And when I sit in these meetings, I see that why things have not moved sometimes for 2 years, which could simply be solved. Because there is just not sometimes the ability to do it. There's not enough experience. And so it's just been going round and round and round. And even when we sit on it, we do not know whether it's the right thing. But the basic point is that we know that what is delaying it, we know what we need to be addressing. And I think that's the most important thing which is there. Of course, growth has to be inclusive. And when we talk of inclusive growth, I've been talking of inclusive growth for the last 10, 12 years, that growth in India must be inclusive, because the challenge in India where growth is concerned is just not achieving growth, is in managing growth. And when we talk of managing growth, we need to be talking of inclusive growth. How do we make growth touch all sections of society in all parts of the country? If we were to look at the Northeast and some other parts of this country, the districts of the country, we'll certainly see that growth has not been inclusive. What does a 5% or a 8% or a 9% GDP mean to the people in the districts? What does it translate into? And once we did a calculation, when I was Commerce Minister, we did a calculation of what does 8% growth mean to different people. What does it mean to the textile industry? What does it mean to the auto industry? And we came to some very interesting findings. One of the findings was that 8% growth meant that about 23 million people would move from having 1 meal a day to 2 meals a day. And so many more million people would move from having a mere 2 meal to a better 2 meals. Now, what does that mean? That means, how do we get our infrastructure for food all right? How do we look at the supply situation? These are the challenges which we need to be addressing, because each thing has a different meaning for different sectors and for different people. Certainly the government could do more and is trying to, but I don't think government's courage alone or government's ability alone would end uncertainty, unless the stakeholders also respond positively with courage and positivity. Those present in this audience, I think, have a great role to play. Also, your courage and initiative is vital for the revival of the economy. I thank AIMA for inviting me again, and congratulate the association once more on this Ruby Jubilee of the National Management Association. Thank you.